Cabins in the woods have always held a certain allure, peaceful, isolated, and perfect for escaping the chaos of everyday life. But sometimes, the quiet isn't as comforting as it seems. The woods can hide dark secrets, and not all cabins are as safe as they appear. What happens when you find yourself trapped in one with no way out? Prepare yourself for stories that are not only chilling but truly disturbing. Welcome to Disturbia. I didn't want to go to the cabin. Not at first. It was Mike's idea, and he was always the one pushing for these weekend getaways, talking about how we needed to unplug, get away from the noise, reset our minds. I wasn't interested, but he wouldn't shut up about it, and eventually, I gave in. We got there just before sundown. The drive had been long, winding through endless trees that swallowed the road whole. By the time we reached the clearing where the cabin stood, the sky was bleeding orange and purple. It was small, old, barely standing in some places, but Mike grinned like we'd just discovered buried treasure. "This is perfect," he said. I wasn't so sure. The first night was fine. We unpacked, cracked open a few beers, and sat on the porch, listening to the forest. It was quiet, too quiet, in a way that made my skin crawl. I told Mike, and he just laughed. "That's the point," he said. "Nothing but us and nature." I didn't sleep well. The wind howled through the trees, branches scraping against the roof like fingernails. At one point, I thought I heard something else, something heavier moving outside, crunching through the underbrush. I told myself it was just an animal, just my imagination. But the feeling lingered. The next day, Mike wanted to go hiking. He had a map, some trail he wanted to check out. I told him it'd pass. Something about this place felt wrong, and I didn't want to push my luck. He shrugged, said he'd be back before dark, and left. Hours passed. The sun crept across the sky, shadows stretching long and jagged over the ground. Mike didn't come back. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe he lost track of time. Maybe he just wanted to stay out a little longer. But when night fell, and there was still no sign of him, I knew something was wrong. I grabbed a flashlight and went looking. The woods felt different at night. The air was thick, heavy, pressing against me like a weight. Every step sent dead leaves whispering beneath my feet. Every breath sounded too loud. I called Mike's name, but the trees swallowed my voice. Then I found the blood, a smear of it, dark and wet, glistening on the bark of a tree. My stomach twisted. I shone the flashlight around, searching for more, and saw the trail. Drops, then splashes, then a streak leading deeper into the woods. I didn't want to follow it. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run. But I couldn't leave Mike out there. I followed the blood. The deeper I went, the worse it got. The trees pressed in tighter, their gnarled limbs reaching like skeletal fingers. The wind died, leaving behind only silence. And then, a sound, a low, wet gurgling noise. I swung the flashlight toward it, and my stomach dropped. Mike was there, slumped against a tree. His throat was open, torn wide, his face frozen in an expression of pure terror. Blood soaked his shirt, pooled around him, painting the ground black. But that wasn't the worst part. Something crouched over him. At first, my brain refused to process it. It was human-shaped but wrong, too thin, too long, its limbs stretching in unnatural ways. Its skin was dark, mottled, almost blending with the shadows. And its eyes. God, its eyes. Two pinpricks of white in the darkness, locked onto me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then it stood. The thing rose to its full height, towering over me. Its head tilted, studying me. And then it took a step forward. I ran. I don't remember the sprint back to the cabin. Only the raw, animal terror pumping through my veins. The crash of branches as I tore through the woods. The cabin was ahead, the porch light a flickering beacon, and I practically dove inside, slamming the door behind me. I locked everything. Windows, doors, even shoved a chair under the handle. My mind raced, trying to process what I had seen, trying to come up with any explanation that made sense. Nothing did. Then the scratching started. Soft, at first. A light scrape against the wood. Then again, and again. Closer, more insistent. It was at the door. A long, slow creak as the handle turned. The lock held. But then the whisper started. Not words. Not really. Just a sound. A breath. A suggestion of something familiar. It knew me. It knew my name. I pressed myself against the far wall, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, even though I knew it wouldn't help. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. The wood splintered. The door wouldn't hold. Then, silence. It was gone. I didn't move. I stayed there all night, shaking, waiting for it to come back. But it never did. When morning came, I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the car. Didn't breathe until I was speeding down that winding road, away from the cabin, away from whatever had killed Mike. I called the cops. They found the cabin, found the blood, but not Mike, not the thing. Just an empty clearing, the door torn off its hinges, and deep claw marks in the wood. They told me it was a bear, that I was in shock, that I must have imagined the rest. But I know what I saw, and I know it saw me too. I wasn't supposed to be out there. I knew that much. The cabin had been abandoned for years. Everyone in town knew about it. The so-called Widow's Hollow. The stories went back generations. People disappeared. Shadows moved when they shouldn't. The kind of place kids dared each other to approach but never went inside. The kind of place you didn't think about at night. But there I was. It wasn't my idea. My cousin Eric had dared me. He always had something to prove. Said we'd camp there overnight, bring some beers, take some pictures. Just to say we did it, he told me with that smirk of his. I told him it was a dumb idea, but I went anyway, because I had something to prove too. We got there just before dark. The drive was long, the dirt roads winding, barely maintained. Trees swallowed the path behind us as we went, like something closing its mouth. When we pulled up to the clearing, the cabin stood there like a corpse, rotting, sagging, waiting. The windows were black holes. The door leaned slightly open, as if welcoming us inside. Eric went in first. I hesitated, the air thick and heavy, but he just laughed. "Don't be scared," he said. I followed. The inside was worse. Dust choked the air. Old furniture sat broken and forgotten. The fireplace was clogged with debris, the walls scarred with deep scratches. It smelled like mold and something else. Something faint, something rotten. We set up in the main room. Sleeping bags, a lantern, a couple of beers each. I kept glancing toward the stairs that led up to the second floor. The banister was broken, The steps warped. I swore I heard something up there. A shift, a creak. But Eric ignored it, so I tried to. Night fell fast. The lantern cast long shadows. Every movement made them stretch and shrink like living things. We talked for a while, joked around, but there was an edge to it. Neither of us could fully relax. Then, the noises started. Soft at first, a shuffle, a tap, a whisper of movement where there shouldn't be any. Eric froze mid-sentence. "You hear that?" I nodded. I didn't want to, but I did. We turned off the lantern, sat in the dark, listened. Silence. Then, a footstep, upstairs. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be a rat, too precise to be the wind. Eric grabbed the flashlight, shone it toward the stairs. "Hello?" he called like an idiot. No answer. I whispered, "Dude, let's go." He shook his head, stood up. "It's probably just an animal. I'll check it out." Eric, but he was already moving. He climbed the stairs, flashlight sweeping the darkness. The boards groaned under his weight. I held my breath. Then, a crash. The sound of something heavy slamming shut. Eric, silence. Then, running. Fast. Desperate. The sound of him sprinting down the hall above me, the floorboards shaking with each step. Then the thudding stopped. Then, a scream. Not just a yell. Not even a cry for help. A raw, throat-shredding sound of pure terror. Then nothing. I bolted. Didn't think. Just ran. Through the door, into the trees, branches slapping my face. I heard something behind me. Heavy, fast, gaining. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs nearly gave out. Then, the cabin light flicked off. I don't remember getting to the car. Only the way my hands fumbled with the keys. The engine stalling once, twice, before roaring to life. The headlights cut through the dark. I peeled out, my heart a hammer in my chest. I drove back to town. Didn't stop. Didn't breathe. The cops went out there the next day. Found our sleeping bags, our beers, my flashlight, lying near the stairs. But no Eric, no signs of struggle, no blood, no footprints leading away. Just an empty cabin, and the upstairs door, shut, the one we'd found wide open when we arrived. They told me he must be run off, got lost in the woods, that maybe he wanted to disappear. But I know the truth. I know what I heard, and I know something else. That cabin is still out there, waiting. I wasn't supposed to be here, but I had nowhere else to go. The fire had taken everything. My home, my car, and nearly my life. I needed a place to clear my head, somewhere to figure out what the hell to do next. My uncle had a cabin deep in the woods, abandoned for years. He always said he meant to fix it up, but he never did. Now it was mine, left to me in his will, along with a handful of half-burned photographs and a key that barely fit the rusted lock. I arrived just before nightfall. The drive had been long, the road winding and narrow, flanked by thick trees that swallowed the last of the daylight. The cabin stood in a small clearing, its blackened wood scarred from some long-forgotten fire. The windows were tall and narrow, like watching eyes. It should have been empty. It should have been silent. But I swear, as I stepped out of the car, I saw movement in the upper window. I told myself it was my nerves, grief, stress, exhaustion. I grabbed my bag, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The stench hit me first. Mold, rot, something deeper, fouler. The air was thick, damp, and wrong. I flicked on my flashlight. The walls were scorched. The wooden floor warped as if it had bubbled and twisted under extreme heat. The furniture was gone, except for a single wooden chair in the center of the room. I should have left, but I didn't. I set up my sleeping bag in the corner, near the cold fireplace, and cracked open a beer. The silence outside was unnatural. No wind, no insects, no rustling leaves, just stillness, like the entire forest was holding its breath. Then came the sound, a slow, rhythmic thumping from beneath the floor. I froze, beer halfway to my lips. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. The noise was faint but deliberate, like something knocking from underneath the wooden boards. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the floor. The thumping stopped. Silence. Then, creep. I snapped the flashlight up toward the stairs. A shadow moved at the top. Something thin, twisted. It darted out of sight before I could see its face. My breath caught in my throat. The cabin was supposed to be abandoned. I was supposed to be alone. Slowly, I stood up, every instinct screaming at me to run. I took a step toward the door, and the floor moved, not like settling wood, not like a creaky board. It pulsed beneath my foot. I staggered back, my flashlight trembling. The surface of the floor rippled, as if something underneath was breathing. Then a hand, a human hand, pushing up between the cracks, pale and clawing, fingernails broken and caked with something dark. I bolted. I sprinted for the door, yanking it open, and stopped cold. Someone was outside, standing just beyond the tree line. A man? No, something shaped like a man. His limbs were too long, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His eyes were black pits, hollow and endless, and he was smiling. He raised a hand and waved. I slammed the door shut, locking it even though I knew that wouldn't help. My mind raced. My uncle's cabin. He never talked about it. He never let anyone come here. Had he known? Had he seen a voice? Not outside, inside, calling my name. I turned. The wooden chair in the center of the room was no longer empty. Something sat there, a shape, shifting, writhing in the dim light. It raised its head slowly, too slowly, and grinned at me with my uncle's face. You shouldn't have come here. The floor buckled beneath me. The walls pulsed like breathing flesh. The air turned thick, choking. I ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time, because the thing in the chair was standing now, stretching, unfolding, whispering in a voice that sounded too much like mine. The upstairs hall was narrow, suffocating. The doors were all closed except one. I didn't want to go in. I had to go in. The bedroom was empty except for a mirror, and in the mirror, not my reflection. Something else. Something wearing my skin, watching me with hungry eyes. I stepped closer, my breath hitching. It smiled, and behind me, in the doorway, a whisper. My uncle's voice. It always needs a new one. Pain exploded through my skull. Everything went black. I woke up outside. The cabin was gone. The clearing was empty, only blackened earth where it had stood. My car was gone. My phone was gone. My bag, my clothes, my life, gone. And then I saw him, standing at the edge of the woods, a perfect copy of me, smiling. He turned and walked into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. And I understood. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to leave. But something had to stay. Something had to take my place. And the woods were still hungry.